Welcome to another episode of The Intelligent Speculator, where our purpose is to provide insights into economic and market movements that have been successful in helping us grow our wealth. And now, let's hear from the hosts of our show, Jesse Sanders and Lathan Fritz.
Hey guys, I'm your co-host Jesse Sanders. In our last episode, Lathan ended by sharing that he believes there's a 95% probability that our economy is heading into a severe contraction, that we're on the cusp of a deflationary time period, and that it's going to affect all of us. So let's pick up right where we left off. Lathan, glad to have you back, man.
Always glad to be back here, Jess. Thanks for always inviting me back.
No worries, my man. So we finished last show on cliffhanger, a little doom and gloom with the 95% certainty of heading into the deflationary period. Mm-hmm. And we talked a little bit on what would be some indicators that might show that you're wrong. And you kind of touched on, maybe unemployment gets under control. We have some economic growth. But wanted to look on the flip side now. What would be some indicators over the next few months that you would see as cementing your belief that we are indeed heading for this deflationary time period?
No, for sure. Now, I will say this kind of like as a caveat. I think actually over the next, 3-4 months, things might actually start looking better just because of all the money that the federal government has poured into relief packages, and more will come. I'm a firm believer that before the summer ends, there will be another bill that's passed in the House and Senate. That's probably another $1 to $2 trillion that puts money in people's pockets. And so, with all that initial money, it's kind of like a short-term economic boost. And the Federal Reserve is going to continue to be offering loans to corporations, and they've already had that huge $3.5 trillion that they've offered to print and buy up Treasury bonds through quantitative easing, which basically just means money printing. And so, we've already talked about how that has helped us kind of like stabilize where we are today. So, I would actually envision this kind of carrying on close to the end of the year with kind of like this support and, probably unemployment looking a lot better. And, not necessarily like, economic growth that we saw, last year or previous to COVID-19, but, quarter three is going to look a lot better than quarter two, just because we shut down the economy for basically, quarter two, and so you will see that initial improvement. But what I think you really want to look for is quarter one of 2021. Like that's going to be kind of like very telling of, is there a new wave of bankruptcies or something that sets off where, instead of kind of like we see a slow, we see kind of an improvement in unemployment that maybe gets down to 8-9%, because of all the stimulus and people start getting back to work and we have all these relief packages that have been passed. So let's say, we're around like 8 to 10% unemployment at the end of the year, but then January 2021 comes, or I should say end of quarter one of 2021. And then all of a sudden you start seeing unemployment tick up another percent or taking up 2% because people start laying people off. There's not a demand for goods or services. There's more bankruptcies that follow. There's more, there's more problems in the credit markets because people aren't paying their debts or, being late on their payments. Those are the numbers I'm going to be looking for is kind of like starting of next year, like where are we, what are the economic growth numbers? And what are the unemployment numbers? Because those are going to tell a lot about what's going on and who's really being affected, and what's the effect of, I should say, once the stimulus effect runs out, once all the money has been spent or saved, etc., and then people realize there isn't a demand for goods and services anymore. So they start laying people off. So you have that like second wave, very much kind of like we've talked about in our past episodes, where it's kind of like you have that initial sell-off, then you have like a bear market rally, and then you have a second sell-off. So that's kind of what I'm looking for, is kind of like that, after this initial improvement, kind of like the next dip down.
Yep. And you think this initial improvement, like you said, could run out to the end of the year. Mm-hmm. That second wave of bankruptcies, though, would you anticipate that being a lot larger than, this initial wave we've seen, J.C. Penney, Hertz, Neiman Marcus, how would what we've seen already compare with what you anticipate to be down the road?
Maybe not all at once. I think, this initial kind of like was just a punch in the face. This next one I think is almost going to be kind of like screeching on a chalkboard, where it's kind of like you have that next wave, so people aren't feeling very optimistic, but maybe not necessarily like just a huge, hurricane of bankruptcies or loans, but like enough to make people nervous, which then kind of makes people say like, maybe I should start saving more. We should we shouldn't be taking on any more debt. We should be kind of preserving what we have. And that's going to lead kind of like to another little like mini waves of bankruptcies, which kind of like creates a compounding effect, because then it's like, there's more bankruptcies that just came. So now we don't want to spend as much. There's not as many people out there buying products and services. So, we might have to let some staff go, or we need to be careful about what we purchase, for our company from other vendors. So those vendors don't get as much money. So they're looking at ways to cut costs. And it's just kind of like this continual cycle. So I don't necessarily think like, when COVID came, it was just like, this person's going bankrupt, all these layoffs that are happening. There was like just this huge impact. I think this second wave is you're not going to have this like initial like punch in the face, but it's just going to be a long drawn out process, to where again it's kind of like you start seeing 8% unemployment go up to 9%, then 9% to 10%, then 10 to 12, then 12 to 14, then 14 to 16, and then maybe it's like you have a quarter where it gets 16 that goes to 20 or 25, and then that's kind of like the sky is falling. And then it's like, then there's, like I said, once you hit bottom, there's no place to go but up. And then people start kind of like, settling down a bit. There's a lot of debt that's wiped off the table. So people are like, either I can acquire a company that went bankrupt for pennies on the dollars, and so they can take that and make it valuable. And so what do? When you get a company for pennies on the dollars, usually you're willing to invest and hire people and start getting them back to work. And so that's when you kind of start seeing the turn. But I think the second wave isn't going to be just an initial like punch in the face. I think, like I said, it's going to be more of a kind of a long slide more than anything.
So the punch in the face was COVID, and that's where you saw the unemployment spike. You foresee us kind of getting that under control, and then early 2021, that's when it just starts kind of creeping up and up and up and up and up, and that's when this thing really goes. Just goes crazy.
Yeah, so I think you're probably going to see a slide from like 2021 all the way into 2022. And then if I had to, and again, this is just estimated time frames, but then probably when you start to get into 2023, that's the bottom will have been reached, and then things will start to get better and things will start to improve.
Well, help me connect the dots here from if I'm trying to personalize this. Right now, everybody felt COVID. Business was shut down. We're all quarantined. So that one's easy to feel. But if we're looking at that slow slide, what if you're, for the people that are employed by those companies going bankrupt, or those people that get laid off, obviously they're going to feel that very close to home. But for the rest of us, how is it going to affect your normal American citizen, the guy that works at the bank, the guy that that you're in church with, your neighbor? How is it going to affect kind of the day-to-day life for your everyday American?
I mean, it's a great question. I would say kind of like all we can really do is kind of look back like historically what happened, from the 30s. And I would say even kind of, if you look, we were kind of in, our early 20s in 08, 09. But it was kind of like for parents, it was just a very uneasy time. And I would say it's probably going to be, worse than 08 or 09. But I think what's really going to happen is, you're not going to be making, if you have a regular employment, probably not making as much money. Therefore, you're not going to be spending as much. So it's more than anything, it's, instead of doing a fancy dinner once a month, maybe it's a couple times a year kind of thing. If, instead of doing, 2 really nice vacations or a nice vacation a year, you're saying like, maybe we'll do more of a local vacation. I think really it's just kind of, you're going to see a more kind of like localized, kind of like local spending, local traveling, not a lot of just kind of like, not kind of like the excessive spending, that we've seen over the past kind of like few years when everything was good, right? Because when everything's good and, you're making good money and unemployment goes really low, employers start raising wages to attract better talent. But in a deflationary time period, where there's more, not enough, when there's more people than jobs, then obviously you don't get as paid as much to do that job. And so I think more than anything, it's just going to kind of put a very depressing effect on people's spending and what they do. And again, not to make this sound like an economic Armageddon and end of the world, because it never is. Like things always, you go through these cycles. But I think it's just kind of like preparing for the next couple of years. We're kind of like for those who are kind of in normal employment situations, it's probably going to be a buckling down time. Where you're just not kind of spending as much as you once did, and kind of watching your expenses more, like everybody else will be. And I think really that's going to be the key. However, I think those who are kind of like very kind of like careful about what they do with like we've talked about this before, where it's kind of, if you have if I had stocks right now, I wouldn't necessarily be looking to keep money in stocks. I would be looking to be in a really good cash position, because during these next 2 years, it's like, one, you have the cash to kind of like help you with that kind of reduced or lost income, but two, like there's going to be really good deals on equities, like really good companies that come up in the next couple of years, if this deflationary situation plays out. And so more than anything, I think for the normal person, it's like, it's going to be we spend less, we watch our pocketbooks more, and we don't take on as much debt. So you're not going to see as much car buying, home buying, even kind of like credit card spending is going to, consumer spending, which a lot of consumer spending is generated through credit cards. You're going to be seeing less of that. And so I think it's just one of those things where there's going to be a depressing effect, hence why it's called the deflationary period, kind of like a depressing effect on spending, which in that situation, it's like the value of your dollar that you have in savings actually goes up, because you can buy more products and services and assets with that same dollar than you could, a year ago. And so as far as preparing for this, the thought would be, kind of like what we see with weather. You're preparing for the storm. You're buckling, boarding up the windows. You're kind of trying to cut frivolous expense and be prepared for when, one, kind of protect you during the roughest parts, but then be prepared to act when opportunities arise. No, exactly, yeah.
And would you see it affecting, different sectors of the population? Is it going to hit the top 1% of wage earners at all? Is it only going to affect the bottom 60? Will it affect the middle class? Is this thing that up at the top they're insulated from it, or is this just hit the entire population?
Yeah, no, I mean, quite frankly, I don't think Warren Buffett's losing any sleep over this, because it's like, when you have $100 billion and now you're worth, $50 billion, which, maybe he loses sleep over it, but I don't think anybody's feeling sorry for him.
For sure.
And so really, yeah.
Well, I guess a better question would be, who are the ones that get hit hardest?
No, and that's absolutely right. So the ones that are going to be hit the hardest is your middle class and your middle and lower classes, because typically because those in the middle and lower class usually have lower paying jobs, and as a result of that, those are usually kind of in many circumstances are the ones that are cut first. Either they're cut because they're not considered important enough to keep around, or two, companies try to find a way to automate them out to save money. And so it really is like it's going to be kind of like a really kind of depressing effect on the middle and lower classes, which this is kind of going to be a whole different subject for another podcast, but that is going to cause its own set of problems, because when people get mad and have nothing to lose, dangerous things can happen. And so I think there's going to be significant political reform, societal reform that will have to take place in order to avoid kind of like I don't want to use this like word lightly, but kind of in order to avoid any kind of like revolution that could take place. And it's one of those things where it's amazing how quickly things can go from good to bad in different countries. And I think in order to keep it getting from uglier. And as you know, like I said, when that middle class and lower class is hit really hard, and you have a lot of angry people, there is going to have to be some major political reforms, or the political system will be abolished by them, and that's just kind of like a fact of reality. And so I think that's why, like I said, we could do a whole nother podcast on this, but I do think that we're going to be looking at some very aggressive political and societal reforms coming down the road over the next couple of years.
Well, I'm excited to unpack that. Unfortunately, we're out of time for today. It seems like we always, right as we're getting close, I got 3 or 4 more questions I want to jam in, but we'll hold that off for now. We appreciate the time and look forward to talking again soon.
Sounds good, my man. Talk soon.
Thank you for listening to this interview with Lathan Fritz and Jesse Sanders. We hope to see you next time, and remember to like and follow The Intelligent Speculator on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, where we are posting insightful nuggets of economic and market movements. And if you would like to get exclusive information, feel free to join the Intelligent Speculator Facebook group. Good day.